Listen up, family, because what I'm about to lay out is heavy, and I'm not going to sugarcoat a single second of it. The walls around Chrisean Rock are closing in tonight, and if you've been following this saga from the jump, you already know we've crossed into a new chapter, one that stinks of desperation, panic, and a body count that refuses to stay buried. What started as a paternity dispute between Chrisean Rock and Blueface has metastasized into something far darker, and every hour that passes seems to drag Chrisean Rock deeper into a hole she may never climb out of. Fresh whispers, fresh receipts, fresh cracks in her story, and a growing chorus of voices in the culture saying the same thing at the same time. Chrisean Rock is running out of places to hide. This is not a spat. This is not a rumor mill spinning on empty. This is the sound of a legend collapsing in real time, and if you blink you are going to miss the moment the ground opens up underneath her. Before I go one step further, let me lock this in for the record so nobody gets it twisted. Everything you're about to hear falls under the umbrella of allegation, speculation, and street-level chatter. I am not standing here declaring that Chrisean Rock has committed a crime. I am not the judge, I am not the jury, and I am certainly not the badge that ends up knocking on her door. What I am doing is walking you through the mosaic, the individual tiles that, when you step back, start to form a picture nobody in her camp wants you to see. Take every claim with a healthy dose of skepticism, but do not pretend the picture doesn't exist. Because it does. And it's getting sharper by the day. And frankly, the sharpness of it is the reason her team has gone dead quiet while every other corner of the culture is screaming. Chrisean Rock told the world that detectives sat her down and told her she was not a person of interest in the murder of Ronnie Doe. That is what Chrisean Rock says. But here is a small piece of legal reality most people never stop to consider. Investigators are under exactly zero obligation to tell a subject the truth about where they stand. Detectives lie to suspects every single day of the week. It is a documented, courtroom-approved interrogation tactic, upheld by decades of case law, taught in every academy across the country. So when Chrisean Rock says she was cleared, forgive me if I don't take that as gospel. When the real update lands, and it is coming, I promise you, we will finally know whether the badge sees Chrisean Rock the way the internet already does. Until then, we have the receipts. And the receipts are loud. Louder than any statement Chrisean Rock's PR team has been willing to release since this thing detonated. Let me start with the clip that has damn near everybody on this app rewinding, screenshotting, and asking the same question: how did Chrisean Rock go on camera and tell this story? Chrisean Rock sat down for an interview, and out of nowhere she offered up a dream, a vivid, specific, cinematic dream, that she claimed she had the night before Ronnie Doe was killed. In the dream, Chrisean Rock says she was standing on a step. A man was mocking her. She told him to leave her alone. Then, in her own words, Ronnie came around the corner and shot the man. Police chased Ronnie. And when the bullet hit, Chrisean Rock says she physically felt it. She felt it in her body. She woke up rattled. And then the next morning, her brother called and told her Ronnie was dead. She used the word déjà vu. She said it felt like she had already lived it. She sat there, calm as still water, and served up the kind of confession-adjacent monologue that ordinary suspects spend thousands of dollars on attorneys to prevent. Now peep this. If somebody handed you that monologue at a poker table, you would fold every hand for the rest of the night. Because whether Chrisean Rock is a psychic, an unlucky dreamer, or something far more calculated, the fact that she volunteered that story on camera is a fumble of galactic proportions. She placed herself in a psychic proximity to Ronnie's death that no defense attorney on planet Earth would have allowed. And the internet noticed. Track that. Because the internet notices things law enforcement often misses on the first pass, and when the internet notices, the clip lives forever. That clip is going to outlive every branding deal Chrisean Rock has ever signed. That clip is going to be the exhibit that plays in the culture's memory long after the news cycle has moved on. But that is only the appetizer. Let's roll to Blueface. Blueface has been on the record for a long time saying the paternity of Chrisean Rock's son is not settled the way Chrisean Rock wants the world to believe. Blueface has said Chrisean Rock was in contact with Ronnie in the days leading up to his death, a detail that raised eyebrows the first time it dropped, and one that hits differently now that we have the dream clip on the table. Blueface didn't scream murder. Blueface didn't accuse. But Blueface planted a flag, and the flag reads, they were talking. Before the killing. Right before it. And Chrisean Rock has never fully explained what those conversations were about, why they were happening, or what was said between them in those final hours before Ronnie ended up on the ground. Now let's bring Wack 100 into the room, because you cannot tell this story honestly without giving Wack 100 the microphone. Wack has been reading the tea leaves on Chrisean Rock and this entire situation from the opening whistle. Wack was the first mainstream voice in hip-hop to publicly say the child in question does not look like Blueface, does not carry Blueface features, and mirrors Ronnie down to the front teeth. Wack said it plainly, without theatrics, and got dragged for it. And yet here we are, years later, and the same accusation Wack made when nobody wanted to hear it is now the most cited theory in the entire conversation. When Wack calls a play early, you can set your watch to it. When Wack tells you a chess piece is about to move, the piece moves within weeks. That is why every serious observer of this story keeps their eyes on what Wack says next. When Ronnie Doe was killed, Wack 100 did not send condolences. Wack 100 did not offer sympathy. Wack 100 turned the mic on and told Ronnie's memory, without flinching, that Ronnie had slandered him, called him a rat, and picked a fight he couldn't finish. Wack said the man who called him a rat had, in his words, forgotten to pay his cable bill, a coded street phrase that landed harder than any eulogy. Was it cold? Absolutely. Was it Wack keeping his boot exactly where he swore it would stay? Also yes. Wack has always operated on one rule: you say what you want while both parties are breathing, but if you go silent before he does, do not expect flowers from him. That rule has never bent for anybody. Not for a stranger, not for a rival, not for a young man who took shots at Wack while thinking those shots would never come back to visit him. In Wack's world, the only currency is what you say while you still have breath in your lungs. Later, sitting across from Adam 22, Wack 100 dropped a detail that most casual observers missed but that lands like a punch when you replay it. Wack said Ronnie had once caught a body over Chrisean Rock. A murder charge. A body Ronnie is alleged to have taken responsibility for, a body that some in the streets whisper Chrisean Rock may have been closer to than anyone has been willing to say out loud. Chrisean Rock, in a moment that already lives in the infamy Hall of Fame, once slipped on camera and said the words, "I killed," before catching herself mid-sentence and pivoting to, "My boyfriend killed." A slip, Chrisean Rock's defenders will say. A confession, others will say. Either way, that clip exists, and the internet has not forgotten it. That clip has been rewound so many times it should have grooves worn into the servers hosting it. That clip is the kind of Rosetta Stone that gives context to every other clip in the archive, and once you place it beside the dream clip, the picture becomes almost impossible to look away from. Now hear me out, because this next piece is the piece I want you to lock into your memory. Ronnie Doe had a court date. Not a rumored court date. Not a mythical court date. A real, scheduled, on-the-docket appearance with Chrisean Rock, tied to a case Chrisean Rock had pressed against him. And, according to Wack 100's account, Ronnie had told a mutual friend that he intended to use that court date to serve Chrisean Rock a DNA subpoena, right there, in front of the judge, on the record, with no wiggle room, no delays, no last-minute maneuvers her legal team could pull off. The court date was set for that Friday. On Wednesday night, less than 48 hours before Ronnie would have stood in that courtroom, Ronnie Doe was dead in his driveway. Read that timeline again. Slowly. A man who was about to legally force a DNA test on Chrisean Rock's child ends up murdered in his own driveway 2 days before he could file the paperwork that would have changed the entire financial and reputational trajectory of Chrisean Rock's brand. That is not a coincidence a rational observer files under bad luck. That is the kind of timing that makes homicide detectives crack open thick binders and start dragging in phone records, GPS pings, and financial trails. Even if Chrisean Rock had nothing to do with it, and again, I am not saying she did, the calendar is speaking, and the calendar does not lie. Prosecutors love calendars. Juries love calendars. And this calendar is screaming. This calendar is holding up a giant neon sign that says look here, and the more you look, the fewer innocent explanations remain on the table. Peep this too. Chrisean Rock was reportedly about to close, or had closed, a substantial deal with the Zeus Network. That deal, according to sources close to the story, was tied to the narrative of Chrisean Rock and Blueface as a family unit, the child at the center of the storyline being Blueface's baby. If Ronnie Doe had walked into that courtroom on that Friday and forced a DNA test that came back excluding Blueface, the Zeus deal doesn't just wobble. The Zeus deal collapses. The reality show collapses. The brand collapses. Millions of dollars evaporate. And Chrisean Rock, who has built an empire on being Blueface's chaotic other half, becomes something else entirely, a single mother of a child fathered by a man who was, at the time, in the middle of a public war with her. She becomes a footnote. She becomes the woman who lost the plot. She becomes a cautionary tale played on gossip channels for the next 10 years. And nobody in the entertainment industry, nobody, is willing to become that cautionary tale voluntarily. That is the motive nobody in her fandom wants to discuss. That is the motive that has legs. That is the motive that would keep any prosecutor up at night. Because in the world of criminal investigation, motive plus opportunity plus proximity is the trifecta that lands convictions. And right now, on paper, Chrisean Rock has all three sitting in her lap like a stack of unopened envelopes. She had the motive of the collapsing Zeus deal. She had the opportunity of ongoing contact with Ronnie in the final hours. She had the proximity of an active court case with him on the docket. 3 envelopes. 3 signatures waiting. And a growing number of people wondering whether she is capable of opening them without her hands shaking. Now zoom in on what came next. Days after Ronnie was killed, Chrisean Rock posted a document to social media that she framed as a DNA test. The document appeared, at a glance, to confirm Blueface as the father. Wack 100 looked at that document and immediately called it into question. He pointed out that the case number and the names on the paperwork did not align in the way a legitimate paternity test would align. He pointed out that the date on the document predated the child's birth by months. The paper Chrisean Rock waved as vindication had the fingerprints of a name change filing on it, not a paternity confirmation. Blueface, in his sit-down with DJ Vlad, all but confirmed the same read, the paperwork Chrisean Rock had presented did not, in his understanding, come from an actual DNA laboratory. It was, in Blueface's words, the same paperwork Chrisean Rock had already been questioned about on a Zeus Network segment. A recycled prop. Waved in the world's face as if nobody would zoom in. But everybody zoomed in. Let me put this in plain language. The document that Chrisean Rock used to shut down the paternity conversation appears to be, at best, a mislabeled name change filing and, at worst, something engineered to end a discussion Chrisean Rock desperately did not want continued. And it dropped in the days after the one man on Earth who was about to force a real, court-supervised DNA test ended up on a slab. If that sequence doesn't make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, you are not paying attention. That is not a coincidence. That is a strategy. And strategies leave fingerprints. Strategies leave metadata. Strategies leave witnesses. And every one of those fingerprints, every one of those metadata trails, every one of those witnesses is now sitting somewhere waiting to be pulled into the light. Now let's bring in Jessica West, because Jessica West is the moral witness at the center of this entire story, and Jessica West is not playing games. Jessica West is a media and artist manager who worked closely with Ronnie Doe. Jessica West sat down publicly and delivered a testimony so scorched-earth that it should be required viewing for anybody still on the fence about who Chrisean Rock is when the cameras aren't rolling. Jessica West said Ronnie knew that people were coming for him. Ronnie made calls to people he trusted, telling them that Chrisean Rock's people were hunting him. Ronnie was in fear of his life. Ronnie was scared. Ronnie was talking about it out loud to those closest to him. And then Ronnie was killed. Ronnie predicted his own murder to the people who loved him. And nobody, not law enforcement, not the culture, not the platforms Ronnie tried to speak on, moved fast enough to stop it. That is a tragedy layered on top of a tragedy, and it deserves to be named for what it is. Jessica West did not hedge. Jessica West did not soften. Jessica West called Chrisean Rock demonic. Jessica West said Chrisean Rock's family had been circling Ronnie. Jessica West said Ronnie's own family, his aunt, his mother, his grandmother, want no part of Chrisean Rock, want their grandson removed from Chrisean Rock's custody, and are quietly working with law enforcement to build whatever case is buildable. Jessica West said Chrisean Rock is going to hurt that baby if nobody intervenes. Jessica West used the word demon. Jessica West used the word psychopath. And Jessica West said, in the plainest terms available in the English language, that Ronnie's family is waiting to strike. Waiting. To strike. That is not the language of a woman guessing. That is the language of a woman who has spoken to the people building the file. And when Jessica West said that Ronnie, up until the moment of his death, was still in contact with Chrisean Rock, that Chrisean Rock was still manipulating him, still whispering in his ear, still steering his emotions, the picture that formed in my head was not the picture of a woman who was estranged from Ronnie. The picture that formed was of a woman with a target lined up and a countdown running. A woman who kept the target close enough to control the tempo, close enough to know his movements, close enough to know exactly when the driveway would be empty of witnesses. And if that description makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because the description is not mine, the description is the mosaic that Jessica West, Wack 100, Blueface, and the timeline itself have collectively assembled. Now here is where the moral case becomes airtight for me. If Chrisean Rock genuinely had nothing to do with Ronnie's death, why does Chrisean Rock keep bringing Ronnie up? Why does Chrisean Rock, on live streams, veiled posts, and interview segments, keep circling back to Ronnie's death and using it as a warning to others who cross her? Jessica West made this exact point with surgical precision. You do not get to say you had nothing to do with the murder while simultaneously wielding the murder as a threat. Pick a lane. Because right now, Chrisean Rock is riding both, protesting innocence in one breath and cashing in on the chill of Ronnie's fate in the next. That is not the behavior of an innocent woman. That is the behavior of someone who wants the fear without the paperwork. Someone who wants the reputation of a monster without the criminal exposure of admitting the monster's resume. Let's move to the next receipt, because there is more. Blueface, in his December sit-down with DJ Vlad, went into detail about the incident at the mall, the moment Ronnie Doe confronted Chrisean Rock in public, in front of witnesses, and demanded that she acknowledge the child as his. The clip is uncomfortable. Ronnie is impassioned. Chrisean Rock is defensive. Security is nervous. And Blueface, from behind prison walls, told DJ Vlad that he had spoken with Chrisean Rock the day of that confrontation, warning her not to be so exposed, not to be walking around her hometown of Baltimore with the child and only one companion, not to be putting herself in a position where confrontations like that could happen. Chrisean Rock, per Blueface, ignored him. And hours later, the video went viral. And weeks later, Ronnie was dead. Chain of events matters. In a courtroom, chain of events matters more than anything. Chain of events is the invisible thread that ties motive to opportunity to outcome, and once a jury sees the thread, the jury does not unsee it. Blueface has been consistent. That is the sentence I want you to sit with. Blueface has been consistent. From 2023 forward, Blueface has publicly and privately maintained that the child is not his biological son. Blueface has said it on streams, in interviews, on records, and now in a formal statement declaring that he can no longer, in good conscience, continue what he called the plot. Blueface said, and I quote in essence, that as a present father to his other children, he can no longer be publicly branded as an absentee father to a child that is not biologically his. That is not the kind of statement a man makes lightly. That is a man drawing a hard line and daring the world to test it. That is a man who has decided the cost of protecting a fiction is now higher than the cost of exposing it. That is a man who has done the math and has decided the truth is cheaper, safer, and cleaner than the lie he was helping to carry. And Chrisean Rock's response to that hard line was, and I want you to feel the weight of this, a series of messages painting Blueface as the villain, framing Chrisean Rock as the protective mother, and closing with the line, you are not going up against me, you are going up against God. Let me translate that from the language of a person mid-spiral. When somebody in the middle of a scandal starts invoking God as their personal defender against ordinary human accusations, that is not confidence. That is not peace. That is a person watching the exits close, one by one, and reaching for the only argument that cannot be cross-examined. You cannot subpoena the Almighty. You cannot put God on the witness stand. So when a suspect starts hiding behind the throne, that is the last shelter left, and the shelter is thin. The shelter is symbolic. The shelter is what people reach for when the physical exits have all been sealed. Track this too, because it is small but it is loud. In those same exchanges, Chrisean Rock repeatedly wrote the phrase, our son, over and over and over. Blueface, in his replies, kept writing, your son. One party was trying to hold the story in place with sheer repetition. The other party had already left the story behind. That is a linguistic fingerprint of a woman fighting to preserve a public fiction that the private truth has already dissolved. Linguists call this pronoun anchoring. Investigators call it something less polite. Either way, the pattern is unmistakable, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every hour from Chrisean Rock is a plea. Every year from Blueface is a door being shut. That is not a marriage of narrative. That is a divorce being finalized in front of the entire internet. Now let me hand the mic back to Wack 100, because Adam22 asked Wack the question everybody wants answered. Will Chrisean Rock, at some point, be charged in connection with Ronnie Doe's murder? Wack's answer was measured, careful, and, for anybody who has ever watched Wack navigate a legal minefield, surgically precise. Wack said this. If Chrisean Rock ordered the hit, and if she paid, as Wack framed it, a couple of thousand, to one of the low-level street figures orbiting her, it will come out. It will come out because street figures at that level always talk. Somebody always talks. Somebody always gets popped on another case and trades the Chrisean Rock information for a lighter sentence. It is, Wack said, the historical pattern, the pattern that took down bigger names than Chrisean Rock. And Wack invoked Jimmy Henchman as the case study. Nobody knew Jimmy was in the middle of a decades-old murder until a young man got caught on an unrelated case and started trading names. That is how these cases crack. And that is how Wack believes this one will crack, if in fact it needs to be cracked. Sit with that. Because that is not a guess. That is a man who has watched 100 versions of this exact scenario play out in real time in the streets. Wack is not saying Chrisean Rock did it. Wack is saying that if she did, the mathematics of the streets guarantees the truth surfaces. It is not a question of if. It is a question of when. And when it happens, it will not happen with a press release. It will happen with a knock on the door, cameras in the driveway, and a booking photo circulating before anybody in her camp has a chance to spin the narrative. Because that is how these things unfold. That is how the last chapter always reads. And Chrisean Rock, if the whispers are anywhere close to accurate, is a suspect walking toward the last chapter without a script. Now, is Wack certain Chrisean Rock is guilty? No. Wack was clear about that too. Wack even pushed back on Adam22 when Adam started riffing about Chrisean Rock as some kind of criminal mastermind. Wack said, calmly, that murder for hire is not a theory you play with lightly. You do not anticipate murder for hire the way you anticipate a bad album drop. You need paperwork. You need statements. You need corroboration. And right now, all we have are receipts that point in a direction, not proof that closes the case. Wack was drawing the line where responsible commentary ends and reckless accusation begins, and that line matters, especially when the stakes are this high and the exposure is this loud. I respect Wack for drawing it. I respect Wack for refusing to convict on vibes. That is journalism, whether the mainstream press wants to admit that hip-hop veterans are practicing it or not. But peep this one contradiction, because it is the contradiction that keeps me up. Wack, in the same conversation, admitted that if you want something like this done and you want it done clean, the only person you can truly trust is yourself. He phrased it as an aside, almost a throwaway line. But that line, coming from a man who has been in this ecosystem his entire adult life, is the kind of line prosecutors quote in closing arguments. Because if the streets know that the only clean hit is the hit you carry out yourself, then every so-called hired hit is a ticking clock. And Chrisean Rock, if she is guilty of anything close to what the rumors suggest, is sitting on a clock she cannot see, wound by hands she cannot name, ticking down to a morning she cannot predict. That morning arrives for everybody who plays this game. Nobody has ever escaped it. Not with lawyers. Not with money. Not with distance. Let me pivot for a moment to the fandom, because the fandom in this story is doing something I have never seen in quite this configuration. Chrisean Rock's most loyal fans are simultaneously arguing that Ronnie Doe was a violent drug dealer who brought his death on himself and that Chrisean Rock had absolutely nothing to do with the killing. Do you see the trap in that argument? If Ronnie's death was unrelated to Chrisean Rock, then Chrisean Rock has no reason to keep invoking Ronnie's death as a warning. But if Chrisean Rock is invoking Ronnie's death as a warning, then Chrisean Rock is publicly confirming that Ronnie's death exists inside her orbit, not outside of it. Pick a lane. You cannot ride both. And every time her fanbase tries to ride both, they hand the prosecution more free ammunition. They think they are defending her. They are decorating the case file. They are writing the closing statement for a district attorney who has not even been assigned yet. Jessica West nailed this, and I want to give her flowers for it. Jessica West said, and I am paraphrasing, that Ronnie's face is going to haunt Chrisean Rock every time Chrisean Rock closes her eyes. Whether Chrisean Rock is guilty of ordering the hit or guilty only of celebrating the outcome, the psychological weight of that ghost is real. And you can hear it in Chrisean Rock's recent public statements. There is a fraying at the edges. There is a mania in the phrasing. There is a woman who feels the ground moving under her boots and cannot quite figure out how to steady herself. That fraying is not performance. That fraying is what happens when a person who has built an entire identity on being untouchable starts to feel the touch coming. That fraying is what a soul sounds like when it is starting to crack under the weight of what it knows. Now let me get to the piece that has the whole culture buzzing tonight. Chrisean Rock has, according to multiple sources, gone into what can only be described as low-power mode. The high-frequency streams have slowed. The confrontational lives have gone quiet. The public sightings are dwindling. The last time we heard Chrisean Rock speak on her future plans, she let slip on a stream that she was planning to leave the country. Leave the country. That is not a detail you accidentally drop into a live conversation. That is a detail that slips out when your subconscious is louder than your PR strategy. That is the kind of slip that makes federal analysts save the clip and pass it up the chain. That is the kind of slip that turns a suspicion into a flight risk designation. Where is Chrisean Rock planning to go? What passport is she planning to use? What jurisdiction is she planning to disappear into? Those are the questions I want answered before the next headline drops. Because if the badge shows up at Chrisean Rock's door before the plane wheels leave the tarmac, this becomes one story. If Chrisean Rock lands in a country without an extradition treaty first, this becomes a very different story, a story we have seen before, with figures far more resourced than Chrisean Rock, and one that never ends in the accused favor. Because the moment a target flees, the presumption of innocence in the court of public opinion evaporates, and it does not come back. Ever. Ask any fugitive. Ask any executive who thought a private jet would save them. Ask any celebrity who watched their brand die the day the news cycle labeled them a flight risk. Now let me step back and give you the shape of this thing as I see it, because I owe you the honest read. Chrisean Rock is not, in my opinion, the mastermind villain some corners of the internet want to make her into. Chrisean Rock is, in my read, a woman whose personal chaos, financial desperation, and public brand collided with a man who refused to let her write him out of his own child's life. Whether Chrisean Rock ordered anything, whispered anything, or merely allowed events to unfold around her without warning the man in the crosshairs, the reality is that Ronnie Doe is dead, and the timeline of his death sits inside her orbit in a way she has never been able to satisfactorily explain. And until she can explain it, the accusations are going to keep multiplying, the receipts are going to keep landing, and the culture is going to keep circling. The culture does not forget. The culture does not move on. The culture archives everything, and Chrisean Rock is now inside that archive whether she wants to be or not. The internet has already convicted Chrisean Rock in the court of public opinion. The court that matters, the one with a robe, a gavel, and a docket, has not yet returned its verdict. Wack 100 says the verdict is coming. Jessica West says the family is waiting to strike. Blueface has stepped off the plot. And Chrisean Rock, if the reports are accurate, is packing a bag. 4 different voices. 4 different vantage points. One shared conclusion. That is not coincidence. That is convergence. And convergence, in stories like this one, is the last stage before collapse. Convergence is the moment where independent witnesses arrive at the same testimony without having coordinated their notes. Convergence is the fingerprint of truth trying to surface. Convergence is what juries call reasonable belief beyond reasonable doubt. That is where we are tonight. And that is why the next 30 days in this story matter more than the last 3 years combined. Because if a low-level street figure gets popped on an unrelated charge and starts trading names, this story stops being a rumor and becomes a case number. If the Baltimore homicide unit closes in on a suspect and that suspect turns states, Chrisean Rock's team will have less than 72 hours to build a defense that does not exist yet. And if Chrisean Rock leaves the country before any of that unfolds, then every rumor you have heard on this channel and every other channel gets retroactively confirmed by the flight manifest. There is no version of that outcome where Chrisean Rock walks away with her reputation intact. There is only the question of whether she walks away at all. There is only the question of whether the walk becomes a run, and whether the run becomes a headline that reads like an obituary for a career that was once one of the loudest in hip-hop. I have been in this culture long enough to know the difference between a rumor that fades and a rumor that hardens into an indictment. This one is hardening. You can feel it in Wack 100's tone. You can feel it in Blueface's withdrawal. You can feel it in Jessica West's certainty. You can feel it in Chrisean Rock's silence, because Chrisean Rock, when the walls are not closing in, is one of the loudest voices in the entire ecosystem. And Chrisean Rock is not being loud right now. Chrisean Rock is being quiet. And the quiet is louder than anything Chrisean Rock has ever said out loud. Silence, in Chrisean Rock's playbook, has never been a strategy. Silence, in Chrisean Rock's life, has always been a symptom. And the symptom right now is screaming. Before I let you go, I want you to sit with one more piece of the puzzle. Ronnie Doe was, by every account I have been able to gather, in the delivery room the night Chrisean Rock's child was born. Wack 100 said it. Multiple sources confirmed it. Chrisean Rock returned to Baltimore, her hometown, Ronnie's territory, to give birth. Not Los Angeles. Not Blueface stomping grounds. Baltimore. That is not the geography of a woman who believes Blueface is the father. That is the geography of a woman who knows exactly who the father is and who wanted that father present at the moment of birth. And that geography, more than any DNA paper Chrisean Rock has ever waved, is the receipt that closes the case for me. Because paperwork can be forged. Interviews can be spun. Statements can be walked back. But the geography of a birth, the choice of city, the presence of a specific man in the delivery room, those are decisions that leave a trace no PR team can scrub. Those are decisions the human heart makes when the human brain is not looking. Those are the tells. Do with that what you will. The story is not over. The story is not close to over. The story is, in fact, in the exact middle of the arc where everything either collapses in slow motion or explodes in a single news cycle. If Baltimore homicide moves, we will be here. If Wack 100 drops a new detail, we will be here. If Blueface breaks his silence with fresh receipts, we will be here. If Chrisean Rock boards a plane, we will absolutely be here. And if a street figure gets popped and starts trading names, that will be the video that redefines this entire saga, and you will hear it from me first. Because we do not chase the story on this channel. We stay 2 moves ahead of it. And this story is telling us where it wants to go long before the mainstream media has caught up. This story is writing itself in the dark, and I have a flashlight, and I intend to use it. Drop your read in the comments. Tell me whether you think Chrisean Rock is a woman being wrongly hunted by the internet, a woman who let events unfold without stopping them, or a woman who set those events in motion herself. Tell me whether you think Wack 100 is calling the play correctly. Tell me whether you think Blueface stepping off the plot is the beginning of a bigger reveal or the end of his involvement. And tell me, because I want to know, where you think Chrisean Rock is planning to disappear to when the plane wheels lift off. I am reading every comment. I am watching every timestamp. And I am cataloging every prediction, because when this story finally cracks, we are going to look back at those comments and see exactly who called it. And I want to give those callers the flowers they will have earned. Because being early on a story like this one is not luck. It is instinct. And instinct deserves to be recognized. There is one more thread I have not pulled on yet. There is a name floating in the background of this story that has not surfaced in mainstream coverage. That name is going to become the story next week. And when that name lands on this channel, everything you thought you knew about the last 6 months of the Chrisean Rock saga is going to reorganize itself in a way you did not see coming. That is the story I am building right now. That is the story I am chasing. And that is the story I will bring to you the moment I can bring it responsibly. Because responsibility, on a story this heavy, is the only thing that separates journalism from noise, and I did not build this channel on noise. I built it on receipts. I built it on timelines. I built it on the willingness to sit with uncomfortable questions until the answers rise to the surface. Until then, stay locked in, stay skeptical, stay watching. The next chapter is coming. And when it lands, it is going to land hard. Harder than the dream clip. Harder than the fake paperwork. Harder than the disrespect Wack 100 threw at a driveway in Maryland. And when it lands, you are going to want to be right here, refreshing, waiting, ready. I'm out.